Welcome back aboard the Starlight Car. I'm Elvie, and I will be your host for the hour. I had a talk with Eric Robles and Dan Milano, the showrunners behind GlitchTex, an animated series that follows a group of people who try to keep the peace in our reality as video game characters break out of their worlds and cause havoc. Our intro music is a remix of Aquamarine by Magic Circuit, available on their self-titled album, Magic Circuit. You can follow and support Magic Circuit on Apple Music, Spotify, and SoundCloud. If you like what we do here in the Starlight Car, check out videogamechoochoo.com for content like this and more. And if you really, really like us and are able to express that love through an extra dime or more, you can also consider donating and giving us a tip or two at patreon.com/VGCC. With all that said, it looks like we're ready for departure, so sit back, relax, and enjoy your time. We're always happy to have you.
I am Dan Milano. I'm the co-creator and co-executive producer of GlitchTex, and I also play Bit and some of the creatures on the show.
And I am Eric Robles, and I am the co-creator, executive producer of GlitchTex, and I do not play a voice on the show. I only play one in production. So.
Thanks so much for taking your time out to chat with me today. Can you talk to me about your respective careers and journey and how you got here, how you got to the animation industry, or like how things have you done before you got here and what led you to it?
Eric, you want to start that?
Oh man, I base mine off of yours, Dan. So if yours is nice and short, I'll keep mine nice and short. So
yeah, it's true because Eric has a very long and interesting story. Well, for myself, I got into the industry by being just a child who was fascinated with writing. I got my first video camera when I was 12 and I started making videos, and I did a lot with puppets. I like to draw. Eventually I did, make a great deal of videos with my friends all the way up through high school. And then I was able to attend undergraduate at New York University for film and television, and met a lot of people there, mostly just more friends, to be honest. And we created a public access show called Junk Tape, where we had created a puppet character named Greg the Bunny. And so Greg the Bunny was a character that we really enjoyed producing for. And eventually we were lucky enough to be able to get this character onto the Independent Film Channel, where we did short interstitials. And believe it or not, it just through a really amazing series of events, and with the help of some good people, we were able to get Greg the Bunny as a television show on the Fox network. And so I got a really quick lesson in how to produce for television, and because I played the character, I also had a part on the show, and things kind of tangentized from there. I became very interested in voiceover, live action, animation, writing for features and TV, and got all kinds of various odd jobs with different partners and different studios. But in animation, the most recent things I did were I wrote for the series Robot Chicken, a undeveloped or unreleased series called Star Wars Detours for Lucasfilm, Dawn of the Croods at DreamWorks. And, over time you meet a lot of people in the industry, and those people recommend you for jobs. And one of them was Jenna Boyd, who was the then head of development at Nickelodeon, who wanted to introduce me to Eric Robles, who was a writer she had and creator, an artist who was, working on developing a series. And she wanted us to meet and thought we would get along and be able to work together.
And boy, was she right.
He was. That project didn't go anywhere, by the way, but GlitchTex got created.
It was, what was it, when chocolate and peanut butter combined.
Yes. Yes, we were great flavors.
I think, I was the chocolate, maybe you're the peanut. I don't know. So yeah, that's because that happened, all the magic really began once we met. But my journey is a very crazy long journey, which I don't think we have enough time to cover. So I'll just kind of try to truncate a lot of it. But Long story short is I always wanted to be an artist. Ever since I was a kid, I'd be drawing like most of us do. About the time I was early in my early teens, I really was just considering the idea of like, wow, there's like actual animators who do this for a living, but I didn't know anything about the industry. I didn't know how to get into the industry, and this is pre-internet or pre anything really, and not having any connections into the industry. I still had to ask my parents, if it was a way I can get into maybe going to school for animation, but they said that it just wasn't a possibility financially to send me to any of these kinds of schools. So around, the age of 19, I had decided that I was going to do the next best thing, which is get into law enforcement. So animation, law enforcement, two different things.
Those are two completely different things, like
Yeah.
by miles, and like I don't even miles, like just incomprehensible.
For a kid in LA, sometimes it's law enforcement or the opposite.
Just total opposite.
I was gonna end up in jail doing tattoos, or I was gonna go into law enforcement because I knew the streets so well. I knew I would end up in one of these two. I decided to venture into law enforcement. So at the age of 17, I had graduated early from high school and went directly into college to study law enforcement for about 2 years. And at the age of 19 is when I got discovered by sketching in one of my professor's tests. So I'd be sketching a bunch of drawings and doing a bunch of doodles in his test. And, most of the time you get in trouble, which I did a lot of times in high school and, junior high. But this time around, he was really impressed with my work. Luckily, his sister-in-law worked in animation, which, he asked if I had a portfolio. I told him I had napkin drawings. And he asked if, I could put a couple of sketches together, maybe in a sketchbook. So I was really ecstatic about the idea and the possibilities of showing my work to a professional. So I did. And long story short, I got my first internship, which 2 weeks later ended up being my first official job into animation. So at the age of 19, I started working on early shows in the mid 90s, shows like the X-Men, the Tick, Street Fighter, Darkstalkers, and a bunch of early Capcom type kind of shows in the 90s. And then that just continued throughout my career, leading till today, 25 years later in this business. I've worked for every major studio that's out there in one capacity or another, and just been a part of the industry, really kind of putting my ideas out there. And luckily, I've had a lot of great mentors out there who have guided me as a self-taught artist. So that's really a tough thing, especially when a lot of kids around my age were coming into the industry with at least school and being taught into the world of animation. But I always saw it as a benefit as well, because I was being taught by professionals in the industry. And I was just a sponge at that time, really kind of learning. But, eventually it just led me to creating my first show for Frederator over at Nickelodeon as part of Random Cartoons, which led to Fanboy and Chum Chum. And we had an amazing success at creating a new way of doing squash and stretch for CG animation on that show, which eventually led to winning 5 Emmys on that show, and really helped me to continue from that show into an overall deal, which eventually led me to come up with the idea of glitch text, which originally was called 8-bit and High Five. And I had put this idea together because I really wanted to do something that felt like the kinds of shows I grew up watching, like the original Ghostbusters series, the real Ghostbusters. The animated version was something I really was enjoying at that time, rewatching and just kind of getting those feelings again of what it was like to be a kid watching these things. So I had put together an idea, I put together a storyboard, and I put it in my bin of ideas at the time over at Nickelodeon, and kind of forgot about it for a minute until Russell Hicks, which used to be the president of Nickelodeon back then, came by my office one day, pulled out this box that I always had under my desk with a bunch of drawings, was looking through a bunch of my drawings, found this storyboard I had done, and he asked me to pitch it to him. So I ended up pitching it to him, and he loved the idea. And right after that, I immediately put this idea together, and the only person that I knew would really understand me would be Dan Milano, after working on Monkey Quest together. And we had, since we had worked on that project, we had such a great relationship and back and forth. And so I knew Dan would be the perfect guy to get my crazy ideas and try to, just kind of see what the core of what I wanted to make was. And I had sent it to him, and in traditional Dan Milano fashion, if you send him one idea, he'll write back to you with 25 pages of more ideas to add to this idea. So sure enough, he did.
I was very excited about it. I felt that he had struck a kind of gold that I had been panning for, because I love genre pieces and I love supernatural comedy. And I was a huge Ghostbusters fan, like made my own costume when I was 12. One of the videos I made growing up was me running around as a Ghostbuster. And I was rather obsessed with the idea of doing a show like that, or writing, for Sony potentially on that property. So I just thought he had a really brilliant idea. And I really love the lore and the logistics of the worlds we create. And I just had so many ideas. So but it was all given, and, I have a lot of creative friends and we all just support each other. So I was really just trying to be a friend, giving him advice in spirit and saying, hey, consider this, consider that. Here's why I think your idea has potential. I'm healthfully jealous of it. I think it's fantastic. I would love to see it someday. So I want to support you. And then eventually that turned into Eric just saying, well, look, you're all over this. Like, let's just, work together and see what we can make of it. Especially since the other project that we were on seemed like it was wrapping up. And then we just committed, heart and soul, the two of us. And one of the things we dreamt of together was not just what the show could be, but the excitement of building a dream team, of like meeting and working with the best people we could find who would be as excited about it as we were. Because then selfishly, you get to learn from and work with amazing people. And you also feel that you're supported and your project is supported, and bringing so many creative minds together. So I love that about Eric too, that he had those ambitions. I knew that whatever we did, because a lot of projects don't go the distance, but we figured, well, no matter what happens, this is going to be fun, and we're going to work with some cool people.
We wanted to really create an atmosphere of, I only have kind of like a dream version of what it must have been like to be a part of the original team at Pixar when they created Toy Story.
Mm-hmm.
Just a bunch of people just scrapping together ideas and trying to make something as great as they can.
Yeah.
And we wanted to create an environment that was like that, for Glitch Techs, where everybody could come in and be a part of this idea that we wanted to make as best as we can. And because Dan and I both had that as consistently throughout the production, as making it ours and not just ours, like Dan and mine, but like all of ours. And I feel that, because of that kind of leadership, we really allowed that the ability for everybody to kind of bring their ideas and their A game to the project. And, ultimately it led to what the product is today.
Yeah, that's great. Like, you two kind of have found this very healthy synthesis with each other, where it seems like fate has drawn you two together, right? In a way to kind of create like something that perfectly meshes right in a way. You like it doesn't seem like you two ever butt heads, but I don't know. I can't comment on that, right? Maybe.
in the best, most constructive way.
Yeah.
It really is. I think because Dan, has such a healthy personal life, and as do I, with my family, and we both have that thing where, like any relationship, if you do bump heads, you got to talk about it and you got to work it out,
right.
because you're not going anywhere, And even though Dan and I, we started as friends, we've just become more, we become best of friends. And so in any situation, we never, especially specifically with the production, we none of us ever felt like this was the only way to do something. We always put the project first, and what was best for the project was the greatest idea. The greatest idea always wins for us. And that's, I feel, was number one for all of us. And luckily we had Ian Graham, our supervising producer, who really kind of also helped balance Dan and myself out. So between us three, we constantly would, balance each other out. Checks and balances were always made between us three when it came to the final decision-making on the project.
There was a lot of fate involved, actually. And Ian Graham would point that out every so often, when just amazing things would seem to coalesce for us, or things would go terribly wrong, and yet the aftermath would lead to something incredible. But it was the right time in our lives because we both had the priorities of families at this point, and we both had already created a show, each of us, and had plenty of experiences working for people, and we didn't know what kind of mistakes we were going to be making, but we were pretty sure we wanted to steer clear of ones we'd felt that others had made before us, particularly those who really, put ego first, or who were very rigid when they didn't need to be, or who didn't appreciate the efforts of people involved and the value of listening. And we would talk about those things, and so young people need to know that their worst experiences will always be educational to them in a positive way if they look at it that way and decide, well, we're going to try to run our show in a way we hope is much more healthy. And it is about knowing that no matter what's going on, our identity and our mental health is not tied up in the show. So we can, we don't have to have knockdown, drag out dramatic arguments because it's ridiculous. It's cartoons, we're here to create something. We take it very seriously, but you also need emotional maturity.
Yeah, there's definitely no ego attached to the project as far as like who it belongs to or who came up with the best ideas or any of that stuff. It really was kind of this environment where both Dan and I didn't just, we don't have that kind of ownership where it was like, well, this is my idea or this is my project. It was our project consistently, like with all of us. And we just all wanted to be a part of something special together.
Yeah, both of you have a very extensive, history, working in industry, as you've explained. But also it seems like each of those projects you have both done respectively are very different from each other, and GlitchTex ultimately seems to be the most different compared to everything else you have described and named and credited. So what were just some of the things that you can take away from those past experiences that you were playing, that you ended up bringing on to GlitchTex, or how did you approach, GlitchTex with these sort of backgrounds that you both had?
For one thing, it's all proscenium, whether it's puppetry, live action, or animation. We're all cinephiles, and most of our crew is as well. We love cinema, camera placement, lighting, music, dialogue. Those things are universal to all these formats. So that's the common denominator. And then when you produce, you're constantly trying to make something out of either nothing or as little as you may have. It never seems quite enough. And I know Eric had to be super resourceful making Fanboy and Chum Chum to stretch the limits of what CGI was able to do at the time. And that was definitely a factor that we would talk about, learning from that pipeline.
Yeah, definitely. And I never saw myself as only an action guy, only a cartoony guy, or any of that stuff. I just love to tell stories, whether they're funny or whether they're action oriented or, heartfelt, whatever they are. Just as much as I enjoy movies, I like making all kinds of genres, right? The things that I've learned in production has been more of like the filmmaking side of things and artistically drawing styles and techniques, storyboarding, to designing props, to designing backgrounds, it's been everything, so I just brought all these tools that I've learned throughout the years into each project consistently. And the more projects I worked on, the more I was equipped with these tools to create these projects or be a part of these projects. So GlitchTex is basically an amalgamation of all the things that I loved and I've studied throughout the years, and I just try to kind of, put them together. I feel that the job of a showrunner and leader isn't to be the person who does it all, but to be the person who helps bring the people together that are necessary to make these projects happen. That is, I feel like Dan's job and my job is to really kind of put all these people in place. And of course, yes, we're behind the stories and we're behind we're part of every little piece of it, but it's not our job to do it all. Our job is to bring together the proper team. So what I learned throughout the years is really to respect the team, because I, for so many years, was a part of the team. And I've been on productions where you just weren't respected for what you did and you were just another tool in the toolbox, where I wanted to be a part of something different. And Dan also had that kind of mindset. So together, we just brought experience to the table from all the different kinds of projects that we worked on. So
Yeah.
it's not to say that we only do one thing or the other. Like Dan can do comedy, he can do dramatic, he can do heartfelt stories, and I feel that Glitch Text really kind of hits all those marks, which is a huge accomplishment, I think, as far as creating a project that has all these boxes that you can check. And I feel that we were able to kind of bring all those years of experience that we both have into something.
Yeah, it was a crazy but responsible experiment based on the experience we had had. So, I'd honed through a lot of trial and error and a lot of experiences, the writing format and how to approach a story, particularly in features. The structuring of features was very helpful. And then we didn't, again, you don't know how far these things are going to go. So there's this attitude of like, let's just go for it. Let's just try to shoot for the moon. And we did have a lot of criteria based on other people's experience. Like Ian Graham has been on so many amazing series over the years, many of them at Netflix, Avatar, Korra, SpongeBob, so many. So we kind of looked to him to say, what did you feel that did or didn't work about the pipelines you've been involved in? If you could change it, if you could structure it differently, what would you want to try? And the same to our board artists. You're bored of doing the same thing a million times. What would you like to do that's a little different? And then parsing all that information. And we would even do it at a corporate level. We'd ask like people in the marketing department and the toy department, like, hey, we're just getting involved in this show. If you could have it be whatever you wanted, what would you want? And we just data gathered, and we tried to remain conscious of all those things as we developed, to say, wouldn't it be great if we could be action oriented, like just amazing action, but really sweet character driven stories? Wouldn't it be great if we could be a TV show, but write the stories almost with like a live action or even a feature sort of sophistication to the structure? And what if we could do X, Y, Z, endless list? And, we shot for it. And that really enriched it. And our job was to be filters and try to make all those various things work together if they could. And we had great support from the network in doing that as well.
Yeah, I think that goes into, another question. What were the show's specific influences? In fact, actually, I think a better way to phrase that question, what led to finalizing the overall style and direction of the show, I would say, as opposed to any other way.
Yeah.
This is revealing of the generation that I grew up in, but off the top of my head, I remember a series titled Reboot, which is entirely 3D CGI, CGI rendered, and because it was like a game show, it literally was a video game show. It's a show, taking place in a video game kind of they were taking place in a computer, I believe, right?
Yes.
It was just kind of, back then people probably thought, oh wow, this is amazing looking, but and it kind of aged well. Looking at clips of it, it's not that bad looking. But yeah, it used that style to really hammer down that this is a show about video games and paying honor to video games in a way. But also at the other end of the spectrum, I also think of the Quest world setting in The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest, which really did not age well at all.
Yes.
Especially compared to Reboot. I don't think they were even that far apart in terms of like their respective production timelines. I think they actually were kind of close and contemporary to each other, but
which is interesting, yeah.
Not to say that 2D animation has not been present in games. It always has been, and especially more recently in indie game projects. Like it's been like a really interesting medium that people have been exploring.
Yes.
How to essentially the team settle on glitch text being presented the way it is as opposed to anything else. While also ensuring it still embodies what it's conveying, which is kind of like a celebration, but also an endearing, endearing satire of video games.
It is. It's action, comedy, satire.
Yeah, it's everything.
Episodic, serialized, and it is based on so many direct influences we had growing up, and also like a feeling we wanted to have, from the kind of cartoons we grew up with. But to tee up Eric, I think one of the things that was prevalent in everyone's mind that was a good starting point is that we did want it to be a 2D show.
Mm-hmm.
And so starting there to say, all right, now off of that, what kind of elements do we want to pull in?
I think as far as animation goes, I definitely can appreciate the shows that you mentioned, for what they were doing at the time. None of those shows actually were in my head in creating, early creating this show. I was a lot more influenced by French anime
Mm-hmm.
personally. So I was watching a lot of Wakfu
Ah, yes,
at the
yeah.
time.
Mhm.
So I just really enjoyed what Wakfu was doing in the sense of comedy and action and just the set pieces that they had, individual stories they had, keeping the characters on a journey. I just really enjoyed that kind of storytelling. I enjoyed the animation. I enjoyed just everything as a package of what that show was kind of about. So, this was back in like 2006, I believe. I really discovered that project or that show, I should say. And I just followed that show and was so in awe of how they produced that show because that show was done in Flash. And when you look at the show, there's a production value to the show that is just amazing for that time period when they were producing it. And yeah, I just remember looking at the production and wondering why there was moments where I felt the animation was really stiff, but then all of a sudden I would have fluid animation being thrown at me. And then by the time the show was over, I did not pay attention at those, puppet looking moments. I was more in awe of the story. I was more in awe of the fluid animation that I saw in those sequences that really mattered. And I just had so much respect for how they put that production together. So I was really in awe and influenced by a lot of French anime at that time. And also, Scott Pilgrim was something that we were all in awe.
Mhm.
We were just like, man,
Yeah, all the
this.
films of Edgar Wright, who had such a video game and anime inspired way of doing visual storytelling.
So we were feeding off like the times that were happening for us at that moment. So it wasn't, even though we go back to the Ghostbusters and Men in Black, it really is just kind of picking up pieces throughout the years of the things that we truly loved. And a lot of the things that come up a lot of times in these types of interviews are like there's a Saturday morning feel to your show, right? And I think that really just comes from things that we all grew up watching and loving, whether it's Reboot, whether it's this. I feel like Glitch Text has a little bit of a lot of cool stuff that we all kind of grew up with, whether it's Street Fighter or whether it's Castlevania. There's just a lot of cool stuff in there.
It's very important to point out that when we would sit down and talk about those things, we wouldn't say like, well, we want something that looks like X or feels like Y. We'd sort of say, I always loved such and such. And then we'd sit there and say, why? Why now as adults do we still talk about it? Why did we connect with it? What did we love about it? And we would talk about the feeling you had and what it meant to you and what the potential of it was as a child. And we would also talk to so many of our peers and consultants who are also, most of them, creators themselves in various fields and have those discussions together. So it was less like, let's just take all this imagery and cram it together. Let's take these feelings and let's kind of deconstruct why we felt those things worked and then use them as inspiration for what we were putting together. And we just kept laughing because we thought, wow, we can be sort of derivative of so many wonderful things, and yet we're creating something wholly original at the same time. So if we talked about Reboot, it would be a conversation of like, why does that kind of hold up? And why does that feel good? What did they get right? Like they did their research. They're really smart. They had some compelling characters, why is Avatar #1 on Netflix 15 years later? And they're beautiful answers to that question. It is just like a really well-constructed tale with resonant, timeless themes. And so it was important that we not just make a show about video games. We wanted to make a show about characters, and we wanted to do it in a cinematic way that drew from all these influences. And we also knew that we couldn't do it alone. So we would literally say to our consultants, like, imagine the worst case scenario for this show, like the worst, most hacky version of this video game show you could imagine. What would that look like? What should we not do? And then everyone came to the table with really passionate ideas about all the tropes and, all the cliches to avoid and the lack of like earnest representation of the culture. And, and a lot of it we agreed with immediately and had already felt. A lot of things we had never considered. So it was wonderful to be able to kind of, again, have this checklist almost of, things that just helped us keep the integrity of what we wanted it to be in our minds. And then the design influence came from various sources. When Scott Kakuta came on board, he brought his own influences. I know a lot of the team were influenced by Gorillaz music videos and by anime like Fooly Cooly and, stuff from Gainax and Trigger. And then also there's just what's appealing to the eye.
The hardest thing is just taking all these ideas and things we love and then just kind of filtering it through one filter, right? And then see what comes out and capturing the beauty of it all.
Yeah, it's weird. You got to consider it all, as crazy as I just said, but then you got to be willing to throw it away and then just look at some drawings.
Another thing that I wanted to make sure of, even in design, is that the characters didn't feel flat, that they were volumetric, that they had, because we had gone through such a period of rubber hose type style shows, that were on like Cartoon Network or what have you. So there was just kind of like this style, and I wanted to try to bring some of this kind of traditional style back, where there was more anatomy to the forms of the characters and a little more realistic kind of like features to the characters. And there's a softness to the characters, whether it's in the eyes or the roundness of the face, that felt very kind of even Aladdin Disney-ish. If you look at some of kind of the immediate features, it just feels kind of soft. Yeah, so there's certain like little things that I just wanted to kind of make sure I was trying to kind of bring back like a kind of classic style, but again, you can't just go full classic. You have to kind of find an edge to it that makes it your own and relevant to design today.
Yeah, it's interesting that everything you mentioned, it seems like you're drawing influences from things that themselves were a retranslation of something else prior, and it's like this chain effect of like, oh, this thing was great, so I'm gonna draw inspiration from this, but then that thing also drew inspiration from this. There's like this never-ending chain of like just all this stuff, and it kind of all comes down in like a blender, and you blend it all together and hope it works, right?
Sometimes it's subconscious and it's just working its way in, and other times we are sitting there, nerds that we are, and like talking about it and deconstructing it because we love to kind of ask that question, why did I feel something from, when in enjoying this other thing that meant something to me? Can I try to put that into words, like maybe why I connected with it, and then use that as a touchstone, or at least a theory or an idea of why this might resonate with people.
Right. And even with style, like ultimately, like you'll end up creating your own style if you're an artist. Like don't matter how many influences you have, you'll always kind of end up bringing it back to something that belongs to you. That's just something that's going to happen because that's just how, once you develop what you are as an artist and who you are as an artist, I should say, then immediately you'll just kind of fall to this place that belongs to you, regardless of how many influences that you have, So long story short is no matter what your style, whatever your style is, will always be influenced, and be a part of, whatever you're working on. Even though the show might look completely different, there's always some kind of influence of who you are as an artist in your work.
So I would like to explore how much of your personal relationships with games translate into this universe, and can you go into more about your current relationships with games? How much has that changed over the years, or maybe how has that even changed over the course of this project's production in a way? Like, since you're working with other people as well, you might be hearing other perspectives and hearing things about other people's experiences with games.
We did a lot of research early on, psychology profile of gamers of all ages and all sorts of gaming and gamification, how it's really part of our society now in so many ways, and how it's actually been in many forms before. I'm definitely grew up like a Nintendo kid, and I used to play Atari before that, and we both grew up in the arcade age where we were pumping quarters into arcade machines and going to birthday parties at like arcade pizza restaurants. So it was very much part of the culture growing up. And then, I became a PC gamer for a while and eventually moved over to console. And, I've always been fascinated by it, particularly role-playing games, because there's a story element and a character element. And we worked with so many people with so many diverse gaming tastes. And part of the show was sitting down and just talking about all the different genres why they worked, what they had in common, what was filmic about them, what would be interesting to use for our show. And it wasn't so much a checklist of just things we wanted to see, but things that we could use to hopefully tell character stories with. I've been stuck in Castlevania, so we have an episode about that, but it's more to do with that feeling of being stuck and the fact that some friends may find like a shame in not achieving what someone else has achieved. And so it's really about the way the game makes you feel than it is about the game itself.
Yeah, I think feeling is a key thing in anything, especially for me personally. Feeling is everything. When working on projects, I'm always, chasing a feeling when it comes to ideas and projects that I'm working on. And, I think Glitch Tech's really consistently, it's always, we were asking ourselves, what's the feel behind it? But more specific to your question is, games, like Dan said, has always, they've always been a part of lives. Ever since we were kids, we were part of the generation of the, Ataris, Nintendos, just the whole evolution of it all. And we've been a part of it, playing them, and the swapping of games, borrowing games from friends, blowing out the dust on cartridges. Like, we've just always been a part of the evolution of seeing the growth of it. And now what's so amazing about it is both of our kids are gamers as well. And it allows us to be a part of that new evolution with them. And in this show in particular, we didn't come into this like knowing everything that we've learned now. We felt like we didn't know. We felt disconnected, from the industry of games and what was going on in the culture. So one of the smart things that Dan wanted to do right up front was saying, like, let's get people around us who really know this culture. So we went ahead and we got a bunch of consultants. We got Ashley Birch, Felicia Day. We got game developers like Mike Micah. We surrounded ourselves with professionals who knew this industry a lot more than we did. Ask the hard questions of like Dan was saying earlier, like, what are you tired of seeing as far as shows that are out there, and what's not being represented correctly as far as the game culture. So it allowed us to really study the industry before we dove into it and just made up a bunch of episodes about video game monsters.
We want it to ring true if you're a developer, if you're a game designer, if you're a fan of games, if you work in tech support. We tried to let gamer culture be to us what aerospace once used to be to shows like Star Trek, where they were futuristic fantasy shows on some level, but they were borrowing from grounded and realistic sci-fi concepts. So the glitch techs actually do use coding and programming language. We try to approach the logic of the show and how the glitches work in a a futurist kind of interpretation of what this kind of sci-fi could be. We tried to be almost hard sci-fi and really try to make it something that was plausible in the context of the show. And then also we didn't want it to be the kind of satire or parody that made fun of gamers, game developers. We wanted to be a very even-handed look at the culture in all aspects and a tremendous amount of respect and like earnest appreciation of it. Because it is amazing. It's a form of entertainment that has just grown and blossomed so much over the years. And one of the things we all talked about is that nobody had ever really done an earnest tribute. And, nobody was really taking the time to, look at these nerdy characters as fully dimensional people who are filled with esteem and who, that celebrates intelligence and it celebrates fandom, and it can also look at those aspects of those things that can also be like at times ridiculous because fanaticism, gets a little crazy, but it comes from like a pure childlike place. And we want to love that. We don't want to make fun of it, but it's also kind of cathartic to look at the roots of the fanaticism and where it comes from and how we identify with things and how that can get out of control. So as far as games go, our kids have opened us up to games maybe we weren't playing when we were kids. And then those elements certainly end up in the show, and all the people we work with recommend games to us. We had every game imaginable available to all of us. It was the best show to work on because we could just play any genre of video game.
And we had a lot of gamers in our crew. That was another big part of it. A lot of our crew members were just gamers. And so, we had our game area, our area where we had our game set up, and everybody would just play games. So we were making shows of games about games, and we were playing them at the same time. So it was just nice to be around, production that really kind of was in that headspace of playing games as well.
It let it all be very organic to the material, as opposed to a show that was trying to use video games as like a gimmick or a soapbox. We did not want the show to be powered by nostalgia. We wanted it to be really entertaining for somebody who's never played a video game, or for a parent to watch with a child and enjoy because it's just a fun, good show. But along the way, there are those like homages and little touches by people who know what games mean to them and who would see opportunities in everything from like not just a joke, but like a scene transition or a design element or something that would ring true. The music, certainly.
I can't remember specific titles off the top of my head. Maybe it's the best I don't, but I definitely remember there are a lot of series out there that kind of pay homage to nerdy culture, or in some way, again, satirize like, gamer culture in a way, but it's very mean-spirited.
Yes.
And you like don't know like who's the audience for this. Is this for the nerds only, or is it for people outside that window? And it's kind of exclusive in that way. Like, I'm not sure who is this meant to entertain or who is this intended to make fun of, right? And it's not very educational, and in a way, it shuts out a lot of people.
It's dishonest to the majority of the culture.
Yeah, and in a way, it like makes you wonder too that it probably is a very, it probably is a perspective that is correct, but it's also maybe just one perspective, right?
Yeah, one perspective repeated, because female gamers are treated like rare unicorns, when for quite a while women have been 50% of the gaming community, and things like nerds who succeed despite their otherness or despite their limitations, when the majority of people now have, at any age at this point, have gamification in their culture somewhere and are nerds of one kind or another about whatever their interests may be. And so it doesn't seem to make sense or be truthful even at all to do something that would attempt to like marginalize that group.
Yeah, right. And like what I really appreciate about the show is that, not only are you just showing characters being who they are, they're also like diverse in the front in both their cultural background and just how they look. I really appreciate it. I'm going to say that. But also like in terms of the types of players, quote, like that they are, like, Amiko, who herself is kind of what would be a casual gamer in a way, but nonetheless, that doesn't make her useless. That's still like all these characters that have different experiences are working together as part of a team, and they're all still crucial in many ways in figuring out their problems.
Yes.
And that I would like to go into how, unfortunately there still is like many negative and toxic aspects to gaming culture, from the top down, whether it's in the industry or whether it's through just people experiencing games culture as players.
Yeah.
But of course there's like all these positives that are clearly visibly being made towards that. Like, there's more developers that have previously gotten noticed, different groups of people of different backgrounds that probably initially had obstacles to get into the industry. Like you said too, like as both parents, I think the players of games are getting even much younger in terms of like getting introduced to games much younger. Because of like parents like you, where you grew up with this stuff and you're open-minded and introducing these interests to your kids. Like Ghana, like, it's not it's kind of like games are not as much of a foreign niche concept as they used to be. Like in general, there has been this kind of, there has been this surgence of like nerdy culture seeping into the mainstream, and that anyone can like it. And that's like a good thing. Like it's kind of not this ostracized thing in our pop culture anymore.
No, not a shameful secret.
Yeah.
Takes defensiveness out of the equation. The ferocious self-identity as a gamer and the loyalty to a specific brand or genre or whatever, if that isn't tempered with other senses of self, it becomes very narrow-minded, defensive, and then toxicity can come from that, and it does exist. And on one hand, we tried to take, again, kind of a Star Trek approach, where to me, Star Trek originally created a future of idealism where we had evolved beyond racism and we'd evolved beyond petty politics to kind of grow as people. And so we thought, well, our characters should be somewhat idealized. They're pretty emotionally healthy. They communicate well. Early on, we were like, you're not going to see an episode where anyone really even thinks to talk about Miko as a girl gamer or judge her for it. This isn't that world. We're past it, and we want these characters to show it's not even really a factor for them. But at the same time, their well-intentioned goals can sometimes lead to anxiety, worry, and they can be a little bit corrupted. So we did an episode called Alpha Leader, where High Five is very well-intentioned and a very positive character throughout, but he kind of adopts a slightly toxic sense of self because he doesn't know how to handle himself, and he's defensive that people may judge him. And a character like Mitch Williams, who you'll see a lot in the second season, he's a character who is very fiercely protective of his identity as a gamer because he doesn't have much else. Mm-hmm. So he's the closest you'll see to toxic. But even Mitch is a professional at what he does for the most part, and he has his own version of integrity. So, we're trying to not completely ignore these factors, but to try to represent them in a helpful way that hopefully just helps people see what's possible when, we all have a common goal and we all love the same thing at its core, and we can sort of embrace the differences that we have instead of see them as something to push against.
Do you feel that, glitch text fits in this larger narrative when it comes to, this sounds a little dramatic, but when it comes to, I guess, changing these perceptions of what the games community means, in response to our talks about, there's unfortunately still negative aspects to it that needs to be desperately changed, especially when it comes to being a more inclusive thing for everyone. And again, in response to how there's even more younger players, there's more younger players and there's more younger players being exposed to kind of the more even seedier things that are kind of going on in the conversation about the industry, like microtransactions and stuff. I think a lot about Fortnite, and Fortnite, I don't think even thought that they would have a young player base. It's a lot of kids playing Fortnite, and I don't think initially when the game came out that their marketing thought of that, but yet that's what that is, and that's a game that depends on that system to succeed. So do you see, I again, it's a very dramatic question, but do you see ways that the series can be very positive and influential in terms of the games community and who watches it, right?
We hope so.
Yeah, we can only hope that that's what we've created is something that can positively influence the community. I mean, we can't say that we went out there specifically to put those messages out there right from the get-go. Mm-hmm. I mean, right from the get-go, we just wanted to do something that was fun and that meant something to us. But always good-natured and with good intentions. And I think by checking a lot of the boxes that we did as we continued to make it, we didn't have all the answers up front. The answers came to us as the show evolved. And these kinds of messages are I think, positive messages on top of just being a fun show to watch. So we hope to attract kids and adults together in watching the show with, this really cool concept that may look really cool and what have you. But as they're watching it, we hope that they, see the layers of messages that we're putting in there that we feel that they're positive. And if it can influence the community to kind of think things out differently and maybe think of players differently and the other people who are online differently in a positive way, then that would be a huge plus for us and a huge victory for us, I believe.
We hope that people can see enough of themselves maybe in aspects of the characters that with enough good humor that it can be somewhat sobering in times where you might cross a line. And as we consulted with people on the show and found out what was important to them and talking about the industry and their own experiences growing up, so many stories surfaced about people who had delightful experiences in the culture and those who had negative experiences. And not just in the gaming industry, but the culture of our country and the world has been so tumultuous lately. And it's absolutely been on all of our minds about what we're putting into the world and the change we want to see. And again, I'm not shutting up about it, but Star Trek meant so much to me, and I'm a white, like middle-aged male. And when I hear stories of what it meant to, people of color, or to, people who have different gender identities, like what it can mean to just sort of be acknowledged. I look back at Glitch Techs and think, gosh, if I could do it over again, we'd want to do so much more. We didn't do enough. At the same time, I'm proud of what we did try to do, and in a way that wasn't a lesson, because we don't have all the answers, and we don't think kids believe in stories that wrap things up very neatly and solve every problem. But we acknowledge it, and we try to have the characters have a good amount of emotional maturity and the ability to be self-deprecating and to kind of center themselves, or let the other people in their lives center them when they need it. And that's a big theme you'll see a lot. If one character is kind of off the rails, another character is there to kind of help ground them a little bit. And sometimes they argue, and sometimes, it's a struggle, but they are able to, have those interactions and come out of it as a team. So that was the Five and Miko dynamic, and we extended that to the rest of the team, that these be the kind of gamers that we would love to be and play with.
Right. It takes like actually showing this idealized world in a way, like this is possible.
Yeah.
Because if you don't see it, similar to representation, if you don't see it, how would someone young and easily susceptible to many influences would know that's possible, right? Like that's something would not come into your head if you don't see that sort of world existing.
Yeah.
It's not introduced to you as a concept. Yeah.
And we're proud to be among, we're fans of peer shows that are really clever, amazing shows and have dimensional characters. And, I'm watching Owl House right now, and we enjoy Kipo and Dragon Prince. And, we hope it just continues to be a trend, and that young creators out there understand that it's not just about how cool your idea is. There's a million cool ideas, but what do you want to say? What do you want to put out in the world is a major factor.
Well, thanks to both of you for this very, very insightful, enlightening conversation. Honestly, I do mean it. I think very eye-opening to anyone who will tune in and listen to this. Hope so. Hopefully also very educational too. And yeah, where can people find the series, and where can folks follow you to, if they so wish to?
So you can find us on Netflix, and you can watch season 1 now, depending on when you're hearing this. Season 2 will be out August 17th on Monday. So you can watch the entire series all at once if you would dare, which will take a while, but I promise you this, it'll definitely be worth your while. Season 2 is amazing, and we got a lot of great episodes coming your way. And you can find me on Instagram under Eric Robles, or Robles with 4 R's, Robles, or you can find me on Twitter as legit Eric Robles.
And I'm on Twitter at Dan Milano. And my Instagram, I forgot my Instagram. I mostly just cover, I'm so overwhelmed that I mostly just cover the one. I believe I'm just Dan Milano there as well.
I'm assuming you don't use it a lot.
I don't. I'm just kidding.
Okay, that's fine.
You can reach me on Twitter at Dan Milano on Twitter. And we're the outpouring of fan art and support the show has received online has been amazing. These are the 20 episodes that we produced for Nickelodeon Animation that have now been released in 2 parts on Netflix. And it constitutes, our first official cycle of episodes. If fans continue to love it and Netflix and Nickelodeon decide they want more, then, we have episodes that are ready to be animated that we would love to continue our process with. Until then, we're on hiatus and waiting for word. So we appreciate all the support we can get. A lot of people are using #GlitchTechs when they tweet about us. So check out all the art and all the feedback that's out there.
Yeah, and I'm definitely on my Instagram putting a lot of behind the scenes artwork and just, miscellaneous content. And we should be releasing the full version of the main title song, which is about 2 minutes long, hopefully, possibly this weekend coming up before the actual release or on the release.
We just released a crew art book of art made by our domestic and overseas crew that they wanted to contribute and to say thank you to fans. And we also have a folder of resources that we're sharing online with scripts, story guides, design guides, things that people can use to educate themselves about the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you again.
Thank you. We really appreciate the interest.